What's the difference between guilt and shame? And where can we find freedom from our shame? The Issues Etc. book of the month for August is From Shame to Glory, Surprising Remedy for Injustice and Failure. It's written by regular guest Dr. John Kleinig. From Shame to Glory is published by Concordia Publishing House. Their phone number 1-800-325-3040, or browse before you buy at issuesetc.org. From Shame to Glory, Surprising Remedy for Injustice and Failure, the Issues Etc. book of the month.
This week on The Word of the Lord Endures Forever, we continue working our way through the Psalter, reflecting on Psalms 139 through 142. The days formed for me, deliver me, O Lord. Burning coals, set a guard, and attend to my cry. Join me, Pastor Will Whedon, for The Word of the Lord Endures Forever, your daily 15-minute verse-by-verse Bible study on demand. Listen at thewordendures.org or your favorite podcast provider.
This term, burnout, means a lot of different things. Sometimes, for some, it just means I've had a hard day, or a hard week, or maybe a hard year. But what's the difference between simply being tired, being exhausted, or frustrated, and burning out? Welcome back to Issues Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. Joining us to understand burnout, Cassie Beltz, a licensed mental health therapist in Iowa and director of counseling services and congregational outreach for Lutheran Family Service. Cassie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Do we use that term burnout too flippantly, just to say, I'm tired, I've had a hard day, something along those lines?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's an important distinction to talk about what is burnout and what is just simply being tired. Tiredness, I think, would be we've had a long week, we've done a lot of work maybe that's outside of the normal scope of our work, and we just feel tired. You have a weekend, you take a break, you come back and you feel energized and you're ready to do your job again. Whereas when we talk about burnout, I think it's more of a state of like emotional, particularly emotional, but also physical, mental exhaustion that develops over a course of time, and it's not helped by rest. So you take a vacation, you take the weekend, and you come back and you feel just as depleted as you did before. So yeah, I think there is some confusion about what is burnout. Is it just tiredness? But it's an overall exhaustion that's not helped whenever you just take a break.
So what exactly is it? I mean, how would you describe it kind of clinically?
Yeah, I think when people work and care for people as their profession, it could be people that are counselors, it could be healthcare workers, it could be pastors or church workers, and even parents. They work to care for other people, and they do so maybe without taking a break. And that leads to that emotional exhaustion where you just feel disconnected from what's going on around you. It's hard to connect to other people. That exhaustion piece where when you take a break, you just can't ever feel rested. There's going to be physical symptoms as well. So that might be headaches, digestive issues. You're going to have muscle tension, difficulty sleeping. And then one that I've really noticed is that people who struggle with burnout is they get sick more often. So any bug that comes along, they're maybe going to catch that, whereas before they wouldn't. And so I think a way to succinctly say it is that burnout is a shift in how you show up in life, because maybe this before you slid into burnout, none of those things are really an issue, but it encompasses kind of your existence and how you relate to people and are able to move about your environment.
Why has it become so common?
I think that's a great question. One of the things, I think there's some obvious reasons that we are aware of, and it's just the general busyness that we have, being constantly available. And then our culture does tend to reward achievement. We get constant messages from social media, and we're just flooded with information on a daily basis at a rate that we've never been before. But I think that there might be something deeper happening beneath all of that. So when I talk with people about it, I kind of talk about we're constantly having to decide what gets our yeses and what gets our nos. And at first glance, that seems like a pretty simple decision, just a yes or no. But really, a yes and a no has a lot of emotional and relational and spiritual weight to it. When I think about that, I think about it from a family systems perspective, and so that we learned a lot of messages about what it means to say yes and what it means to say no. So some people were raised to believe that saying no was selfish or disrespectful, and maybe they were punished if they said no, and then others maybe gained approval and love by saying yes, or maybe others weren't even allowed to make decisions. So they don't know how to process through a decision. And all of those messages, they don't just disappear when we become adults. They continue to influence how we respond every time something is asked of us. If you think about that, the amount of decisions that we have to make in our modern society, it can be overwhelming. And all of that stuff is kind of going on in the background of having to decide things. And so it can lend itself very easily to burnout.
Who are most at risk for burnout?
When we think about who's most at risk, we usually think about external pressures or external risks and internal risks. And so on the external side, people who are at greater risk are in an environment where there's chronic stress. And again, that's kind of where we talk about those caregivers and those types of professions. But this can be in other professions as well. So if there's like an overwhelming workload, unrealistic expectations, maybe there's a constant demand to do more and more and more, they have a lack of control over their schedule, feeling that they're not appreciated or they don't have enough resources for their jobs. Those can all be external risk factors for burnout. Also, just the environment or the way that the workplace functions. So if there's bad leadership, if there's conflict, feeling like you're compromising your values as you're working, those all increase the risk of burnout as well. And I think another piece of that, like if you're a caregiver, you're working with people, and that's a variable that you don't have any control over. So someone in the role of a caregiver can pour all of their attention, their time, their care into the people that they're working with, and they really ultimately don't have any control over the outcome of that work that they did. And so that can be, that disconnect between the amount of work and the product, if you will, of what happens with the work can also be an area where the risk for burnout can increase. One of the other things I think is that not everyone who's in those same environments experience burnout. And so that's where the internal factors come in. And so we often talk about those in types of a vulnerability. So the people that are responsible, dependable, conscientious, and really caring and committed, those people that we really look up to, those are actually the people that are more at risk for burnout. And then perfectionism is a major factor in burnout. People pleasers that, have a difficult time saying no are more at risk for burnout. And so kind of to summarize it, it would be that burnout happens when there's a very high demand, there's a really high personal investment, and then we don't have enough of that recovery piece.
Are there early warning signs?
Yes, there are. Burnout happens gradually, and it happens, I'd say it's a long, slow slide down into burnout. It probably be described as like a slow leak on a tire as opposed to a blowout. And so some of the signs that you're going to see often show up before people reach that complete emotional exhaustion. And that's typically going to be a persistent fatigue that rest is not going to fix. That's going to be your first sign. It's as if your emotional battery never really fully recharges. Another one is going to be when you lose enthusiasm for things you once enjoyed. So maybe your work was at one time very fulfilling and it no longer is. Maybe you enjoyed hobbies at one time and you just don't have the energy to engage in those anymore. You maybe used to look forward to volunteering, and just all kinds of things like that that were fulfilling for you are no longer fulfilling. And it's not that you're depressed, really. It's just that you don't have the emotional energy to engage at the level that you once did. There's going to be increased irritability and impatience, difficulty concentrating. There's a mental fogginess, forgetting things and that kind of stuff. And then also just a withdrawal from people around you. You begin pulling away from relationships, stop returning phone calls and things like that. Those are all some early warning signs. And then I think I mentioned it earlier, just the physical warning signs as well, the headaches, the tension, the digestive issues, and all of those are signs. And then lastly, I think I would say just a growing sense of cynicism. So people who are in burnout, and one of the symptoms of burnout is just this more negative viewpoint of the world and of those around you. And so you begin to look at maybe the people that you're working with as hopeless, or that there's no point in the work that I'm doing and I'm not effective. So that cynicism would also be another warning sign.
How do you distinguish between what we're talking about here, which is burnout, and really clinical depression? Because they sound like they're kissing cousins.
Yeah. I think burnout can definitely lead to clinical depression. And that's one of the things that I would like people to know is that burnout can lead to some severe mental health concerns, like all the way down to thoughts of suicide if it's left unresolved and untreated. Clinical depression is typically different from burnout in that we can't see this direct link to the environment, if that makes sense. So when we talked about those external factors that can lead to burnout, those are not directly related to the same symptoms as depression. So you're going to have the same presentation of symptoms, but perhaps a different cause. Again, I think that's just going to be a diagnostic decision that a clinician would have to make. But again, I think you did say that correctly, and that the symptoms are very similar, and one burnout can lead to depression.
Cassie Beltz is our guest. We're understanding burnout. When we come back, we'll talk about the physical symptoms that accompany burnout.
We're in the battle, but the sound of the Lord's victory is echoing from heaven and from the new heaven and the new earth, and we can hear the sound. It's faintly, but it's drawing us to itself. That glory is almost here, that life is almost here, that the new heaven and the new earth are almost here.
Pastor Brian Wolf-Miller speaking at the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case Conference.
And when the fight is fierce and the warfare long, steals on the ear that distant triumph song, and then hearts are brave and arms are strong.
For a contribution of $250 by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to watch an on-demand video stream and download audio recordings of all this year's conference, including Pastor Wolf-Miller's teaching on Christian courage. Learn more at issuesetc.org or call 618-223-8385.
Truth, freedom, vocation. Concordia University Chicago offers affordable graduate degrees centered in Christian truth, and our new Advance with Purpose scholarship makes them even more affordable. Employees of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod organizations and RSOs receive a 50% tuition discount on any graduate degree. Learn more at cuchicago.edu/advancewithpurpose. Concordia Chicago. With Christ at the center, we stand tall for the church.
Luther Academy provides additional theological education for our mission partners around the world, specifically pastors who are asking for additional education but do not have the necessary resources in their own church bodies. By donating to Luther Academy today, you will be supplying food, housing, books, professors, and travel for Lutheran pastors who attend our conferences. To learn more about Luther Academy and how you can donate today, visit lutheracademy.com. lutheracademy.com.
Your lifeline to the Lutheran worldview. You're listening to Issues Etc.
Thanks to the following congregations for standing with us by becoming an Issues Etc. congregational sponsor: Zion Lutheran, Harbor Beach, Michigan; St. Luke Lutheran, Clinton Township, Michigan; University Hills Lutheran, Denver, Colorado; Emmanuel Lutheran, Eagle, Nebraska; Holy Cross Lutheran, Dakota Dunes, South Dakota; Our Savior Lutheran, Mankato, Minnesota; Good Shepherd Lutheran, Toledo, Ohio; Grace Lutheran, Columbus, Indiana; Shepherd of Peace Lutheran, Maumelle, Arkansas; St. Mark Lutheran, Waco, Texas; and Trinity Lutheran, Scottsboro, Alabama. Find out how your confessional Lutheran church can support this worldwide outreach by including Issues Etc. in your mission or advertising budget. Just go to issuesetc.org, click Support Donate, and print a one-page flyer. When your congregation becomes an Issues Etc. sponsor, we'll publicize your church on the podcast, at our website, and in the Issues Etc. journal. Welcome back. I'm Todd Wilkin. This is Issues Etc. We're talking about understanding burnout with Cassie Beltz, Director of Counseling Services and Congregational Outreach for Lutheran Family Service. Jesus calls on all of his disciples to deny themselves. They should not put themselves first in their desire to get their own way and exercise power over others. Instead, they should put Jesus first and listen to what he has to say to them. Self-affirmation and self-promotion, self-protection, and self-advancement must be left behind as they obey Jesus and do what he wants them to do. That's from the Issues Etc. Book of the Month for August, From Shame to Glory, God's Surprising Remedy for Injustice and Failure by Dr. John Kleinig. Find out more about this book at our website, issuesetc.org, or call Concordia Publishing House, 1-800-325-3040, and order From Shame to Glory. Casey, you have mentioned a few of them already, but what are the physical symptoms accompanying burnout?
Yeah, I think burnout affects every system in the body. So again, the headaches, I think, are probably a big one. I've worked with some people who they wake up in the middle of the night, maybe because they have thoughts of work or something, and then they have digestive issues and they can't go back to sleep. And so it's not an illness, but they're still really struggling with that piece. Maybe difficulty eating or maybe eating too much. Again, trouble sleeping or sleeping too much. There's really not a system in the body that is not affected by stress.
How does it affect marriage and family?
Yeah. So one of the things I often tell people is that burnout is not an individual problem. It does become a family problem. And I think some people will come into counseling because they're having marital issues, and that what we find after we work with them for a while is that one or both of them is struggling from burnout. And that typically spills over into their closest relationships. And so people who are experiencing burnout, they withdraw because they don't have that emotional energy that it takes to connect with the people in their life. And those people maybe will view that as rejection or that they're no longer care for them. And so then that can just really cause a downward spiral in the relationship. People with burnout also they are a little bit more irritable, and so that can affect the relationship as well, maybe snapping at people or when they normally wouldn't. And you can see where those behaviors where you think, this is not who I am, why am I doing this? That can lead to a lot of guilt and shame. And I think the thing with guilt and shame is that it creates even more distance in relationships, and it tends to make people withdraw even further. And so that's a big piece of it. It also affects the way they communicate. So again, that irritability, if a small problem that maybe prior to burnout they would be able to work through with relative ease, maybe now becomes a big point of contention that they have a difficult time moving past. And then children are affected as well. We know that they don't just respond to what parents say, but they respond to the feel or the emotional climate of the home. And so even when parents maybe try to hide this from their children, they often sense it, and they will notice a parent withdrawing and the parent maybe engaging a little less. And I think the thing with children is they're always looking for a reason for things, and you maybe if you have children or you are around children at all, you know that they don't always come up with the best answer to the question of why. And so they maybe would start to think that they've done something wrong. And so those are just some of the ways that it can impact relationships.
Is there a spiritual impact as well?
When you think about it, I kind of equate it to the relational impact that it has, because we are in a relationship with God. And then that same feeling of needing to withdraw, of not just having limited emotional availability and capacity to participate in the things that God gives us to connect to us, like prayer, reading our Bible, going to worship, and taking part in the sacraments. Those become difficult, and they become more of an obligation than a place of rest. And I think it's important to understand that burnout doesn't cause someone to lose their faith, but it just changes the way that they experience it. And oftentimes when they feel that difference in experience, they would maybe start thinking, well, maybe I'm not faithful enough. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, or maybe God's punishing me. Those are all some of the things that people may begin to think, because again, burnout really does affect how we think. And so they begin to think about God differently as well.
Where's the line where someone says, I need to seek counseling or seek outside help?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, some of the research on the process that someone goes through when they seek counseling. When someone first has the thought of, maybe I should talk to someone about this, until the time they actually enter therapy, there's a 2-year lag. And that's just the average. And now if you go back even further before that, when people first start experiencing symptoms, you can see a lag of 5 years up to like 10 or 15 years, depending on what the issue is that people are coming for. So I think in terms of burnout, the people who are closest to the person experiencing burnout, they're going to notice first. They're going to notice, hey, you seem really tired a lot of times. You don't seem to be enjoying things, or I've noticed you've been a little irritable. So if you have someone giving you that feedback that you know cares about you, I would say that would be your first sign to say, you know what, maybe I should talk to somebody about this, because that slow slide down into burnout, the longer that slide is, the longer it's going to take to climb back out of it.
What can a pastor do to help a parishioner who is experiencing this burnout?
I think the burnout really disconnects us from the peace that we find in what Christ has done for us by his life, his death, and his resurrection. And so I think that a pastor continually pointing someone to what Christ has done for us, that is the place where they can find rest. A lot of times people place their value and their sense of justification in the work that they're doing. And they start moving into the law that I must do this in order to have value and to be justified. And that only leads to more exhaustion. But true rest and peace is found in the gospel. And I think that's very freeing for people. And it releases people from that guilt and shame that's going to lead to even more isolation and withdrawal.
So how does recovery begin? What are the basic things that either a counselor or professional is going to recommend for someone experiencing burnout?
I think the first thing is just to talk to someone about it. Most people, they feel weak, maybe, that they're experiencing burnout, and so they hold it in for such a long time. And so when I work with people with burnout, I just listen for a long time so that they can tell their story, tell their struggles, and know that they're not alone, because that's very important to know that many, in particular church workers, struggle with burnout, and that there's also hope, and that, you can come out of burnout without having to do anything drastic. You don't have to take another call. You don't have to quit your job. It's instilling small daily rhythms and habits that help to replenish you in the midst of the care that you're offering to other people. And so I think we also have to acknowledge that saying that to someone who is exhausted feels almost insurmountable sometimes. And so I just recommend really small little steps that you just build on. So for example, I really recommend physical activity, and that can look like a variety of things. But if someone has not been engaging in any physical activity, I say start small. Do a 5-minute walk 2 or 3 times a week. That's progress. Figure out one thing that you're going to say no to this week and that you're going to set that limit. And so, healthy eating, or figure out something that you're going to do for your sleep, or 5 minutes of connecting with your wife or your husband or your children. And so those small little protective acts that you can build on, those are the things that are going to gently and slowly lead you out of burnout. Now, if you're in a situation where you can get a month-long vacation, I say take it, because who wouldn't want a month-long vacation? But we don't need something quite so drastic as that most of the time. I mean, there probably are situations where the environment itself is just, it's unsustainable. You can't exist in an environment like that, and that you maybe would need to leave. But I don't think that that's every situation.
Cassie Beltz is our guest. We're talking about understanding burnout. We'll discuss what kind of misconceptions can lead to burnout next. What's the difference between guilt and shame? And where can we find freedom from our shame? The Issues Etc. Book of the Month for August is From Shame to Glory, Surprising Remedy for Injustice and Failure. It's written by regular guest Dr. John Kleinig. From Shame to Glory is published by Concordia Publishing House. Their phone number 1-800-325-3040, or browse before you buy at issuesetc.org. From Shame to Glory, Surprising Remedy for Injustice and Failure, the Issues Etc. Book of the Month.
This week on The Word of the Lord Endures Forever, we continue working our way through the Psalter, reflecting on Psalms 139 through 142. The days formed for me, deliver me, O Lord. Burning coals, set a guard, and attend to my cry. Join me, Pastor Will Whedon, for The Word of the Lord Endures Forever, your daily 15-minute verse-by-verse Bible study on demand. Listen at thewordendures.org or your favorite podcast provider.
The gold standard for Lutheran media. You're listening to Issues Etc.
What can we learn about the worship practices of the first Lutherans from a Reformation edict by a Calvinist leader? Find out in Will Whedon's column in the latest Issues Etc. journal. We'll send it to you for free. Just click the red journal subscription button at issuesetc.org and enter your email address. In the Wittenberg Trail feature, Pastor Michael Hughes writes about his journey from progressive Lutheranism to confessional Lutheranism. The Issues Etc. journal. Subscribe for free at issuesetc.org.
While we were still sinners, Christ died for us is preached and taught each week at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in the southeast part of Bloomington, Illinois. Hear the Word at 9 a.m., stay for a donut, and study the Word at 10:15 a.m. To learn more about this former mission church celebrating their 30th year in 2025, visit our website at goodshepherdblm.org.
Issues Etc. guest Dr. Ben Mays of Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Here's what Martin Luther says about the pastoral office. My pastor is practicing the virtue that increases God's kingdom, fills heaven with saints, plunders hell, robs the devil, wards off death, represses sin, preserves peace and unity, and plants all kinds of virtue in the people. In a word, he is making a new world. He builds not a poor temporary house, but an eternal and beautiful paradise in which God himself is glad to dwell. We are calling good men to step up. Come to Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Learn more about studying for the vocation of pastor at ctsfw.edu or call 1-800-481-2155. Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Welcome back to Issues Etc. We're discussing burnout with Cassie Beltz, a licensed mental health therapist in Iowa. Cassie, what kind of misconceptions on the part of those suffering burnout can lead to burnout?
Yeah, I think that maybe they just think they're doing a bad job. They're doing something wrong, or there's something wrong with them. It's their fault. But in reality, if you kind of go back to those traits of people who are at higher risk, they actually are at risk of burnout because they are doing too much. They care so much that it's difficult for them to say no to someone, or they are so invested in the work that they're doing. And so they really, again, burnout makes us think negative things that oftentimes turns inward. And so they just begin to have a really negative view of themselves and of the work and of their efficacy at their work. And their negative thoughts while they're burnt out are not reality. It's not true. And so I just encourage people to really take a step back and what's true in this situation.
When it comes to church workers or pastors, are there signs that a congregation can be looking for? Because pastoral burnout is obviously a reality.
Yeah, I think that exhaustion piece That's going to be the big one to pay attention to, because a pastor he'll come in. He'll come in when he's exhausted. He'll come into work when he's sick, and just noticing that the tiredness that kind of hangs off of them. I think you can see it when someone's in burnout. Physically, they look a little different. They're just a little more haggard. And so I think as a congregation, they can pay attention to the amount of time that they're working. They can, I think, respecting their day off as much as possible. I know that there's also emergencies that happen on pastors' day off, but it's very important. Allowing them to take their vacation fully as possible. Those are all very important things to help mitigate burnout. But I think probably the first symptom that you're going to see is that exhaustion.
Is it difficult for a pastor to admit first to himself and then to his congregation that he may be experiencing burnout?
For sure. Yeah, I think they fear the repercussions maybe, or they fear that they're not being faithful enough, that if they were being faithful enough, they wouldn't be struggling with this. And so it's very difficult, I think, for a pastor to be vulnerable about the struggles that they're having, because they feel that they're the shepherd of the flock and they should be the ones that are strong and they should be the ones that don't struggle with things, when we know that oftentimes the devil works the most on those people that are leading. And so, yeah, it can be a very scary thing to share that with the congregation. And I think a congregation's response is hugely important when a pastor does share those things. Do they rally around him, and do they care for him and pray for him and offer care and support that they can? I think those are very important things. And then when that response is there in a congregation, it makes the pastor, it's easier for them to continue to lean on their congregation for care as they're also caring for their congregation.
The ministry can sometimes be very isolating. Does that contribute to burnout?
For sure, yeah. Feeling as though you don't have a place where you can be yourself maybe, or that fishbowl aspect of the pastoral ministry where everybody's watching you. I think that probably plays a role in hiding some of the struggles. And then when you have a difficult time opening up to people, you're going to feel emotionally isolated. And then sometimes in the pastoral ministry, you're just physically isolated from people because you're maybe out in a rural area where it's difficult to connect with other people. And yeah, I think, and then once someone starts getting into burnout, then they tend to withdraw even more. And so it's kind of a cycle where it continues to get worse.
Can perfectionism contribute to burnout?
Yeah, so perfectionism is actually one of the strongest internal predictors of burnout. And it's usually, again, it's not caused by caring too little, but it's caring so much, and also feeling like nothing is ever good enough. And so there's two kinds of striving, I guess I would talk about. There's a healthy striving, and then there's the perfectionism. So with a healthy striving, you just kind of say, I want to do my best at whatever I'm doing. Whereas perfectionism kind of says my best is never enough. And people with perfectionism they're significantly more likely to experience not only burnout, but also anxiety and depression, because it keeps us in this constant state of striving, of working and trying to justify ourselves. A lot of perfectionism is also tied to identity. So their work or their performance is directly correlated with their value and identity. And so you can see where that's just an exhausting cycle of trying to prove your value, prove your worth in life through your working and your striving.
One basic boundary that I think is healthy for everyone to observe is between work and home. What are the kind of boundaries need to be set to prevent burnout?
Just the amount of work, I think, is important. A lot of times what I work with people on is like, identify your priorities. What are your priorities in life? And I think you mentioned that one with work and home. Home is typically a priority for people. How are your yeses and your nos lining up with that priority? And then, what's your second priority? Maybe it is work. How are your yeses and your nos allowing you to be fully present in your work? And even within each of those priorities, you can identify, well, what are your priorities in home? What are your priorities at work? And so I think if we just try to randomly set boundaries without actually having those boundaries move us toward what we're trying to accomplish or what we're trying to preserve or work toward, then they maybe are not as effective. And so that's why I encourage people to set boundaries around their goals. And how does your yes and your no move you closer to that goal?
Someone says, I've never been burnt out before, but I've been very, very tired. How do I know when I'm just exhausted or at the end of my rope? And how do I know when I'm genuinely burning out?
I think emotional exhaustion is probably that biggest indicator too. So you've worked for a long stretch, you haven't had many days off, you're just exhausted. Again, if you take that vacation and you come back, you're like, okay, I think I'm ready to work again. Then maybe it's just that tired, you just have done too much for a period of time. But that emotional exhaustion where I just don't have the energy to connect to people, to invest in the work that I'm doing, to really care too much right now, that's going to be one of the hallmarks of burnout. And when I say those words about these people who are so conscientious, when they say, I just don't have the energy to care, that's a really big marker for them because that's not who they are. It's a big shift from who they are pre-burnout to while they're in the midst of burnout.
Someone says, well, after this, I think I'm truly burnt out. What is the first step they should take?
To tell someone. The longer they hold it inside and the longer they try to deal with it on their own and just push through, which is what a lot of people maybe try to do. Well, it's just a phase, I'll just push through. And they don't let anyone know that they're struggling with that, then the worse it's going to be. So yeah, I think the first step is always reaching out to those around you who care about you and just let them know that you're struggling.
Cassie Beltz is a licensed mental health therapist in Iowa. She is director of counseling services and congregational outreach for Lutheran Family Service. Next time, we'll talk to Cassie about anxiety. Cassie, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Issues Etc. is brought to you in part today by Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Concordia Theological Seminary forms servants in Jesus Christ who teach the faithful, reach the lost, and care for all. Learn about studying for the vocations of pastor or deaconess at ctsfw.edu or by calling 1-800-481-2155. Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Friday on Issues Etc., we'll have Pastor Joshua Schubing respond to your questions and comments on Eastern Orthodoxy, and we'll get a review of the movie Spider-Man Brand New Day from Pastor Ted Geese. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for listening.
Listen weekday afternoons to Pastor Todd Wilkin and guests on Issues Etc. Issues Etc. is a listener-supported program. Your financial support is vital for the continuation and expansion of this worldwide outreach. Our mailing address, Issues Etc., P.O. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. You can also donate at our website, issuesetc.org. Issues Etc. is a production of LPR, Lutheran Public Radio.
Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Collinsville, Illinois is happy to support the Christ-centered, cross-focused ministry of Issues Etc. Join us for worship, Bible classes, youth ministry, and other opportunities to grow in Christ. We have a Christian day school for children in preschool to 8th grade. We are located at 1300 Beltline Road. Call us at 618-344-3151 or visit www.goodshepherdcollinsville.org.